So I'm Liz Higgins again, and I am an extension specialist with Cornell Cooperative Extension. And a lot of the reason that I put the presentation together the way I did is one of the, I myself write a lot of grants for my work, but I also review grants every year for USDA. And so I look at value-added producer grants, a lot of the recent meat grants for processing facilities, like all those types of things. And I see over and over again some mistakes that people make or things that could be improved. And so a lot of this is coming from a perspective of somebody who, would like you to be able to write a stronger grant and be more ready to write grants. I see there are some people that clearly have it down, and then there are some farms that, they're brand new to it and they don't quite understand the sort of how the system works yet. So this is to sort of give you some insight into like being a successful grant writer. So I'm really going to talk about, first of all, in order to write grants, you really have to be ready to write grants. It's very difficult to see a grant RFP or request for proposals and be ready to apply. Often grants that are successful are projects that have been put together over time. And then when the funding is available, they're really ready to go. So if you're interested in writing grants, some of the things you can make yourself more ready in advance. Identifying what a good project is. Some things that you want to do on your farm are likely to have funding available, and there are things that are unlikely to ever have grant funding available for. Things to determine if a specific grant program actually makes sense. And then finally, what makes a project a likely winner, and how to write an application like a pro or work with a pro. So my assumptions also, I want to be clear, is that this is aimed at for-profit commercial farms or ag businesses. And that farm is seeking a grant to strengthen their business, but they are predominantly in the business of, they're predominantly a farm that's, growing something to sell, or a food business that's producing something to sell, that it's not a nonprofit oriented business, because of the things that a nonprofit would consider for writing a grant, or whether or not a grant is worthwhile, might be very different than a for-profit business. Grant writing is really not the main part of a for-profit business usually. Or that you're seeking a grant to subsidize the cost of adopting a practice that has some off-farm benefit. It could be putting solar on, or changing out LEDs for energy efficiency, or putting in a conservation practice on your farm. So there's a grant that can help you do something that also has, environmental or energy efficiency or some sort of social benefit. So I just want to also stress that just because you're eligible for something doesn't mean that a project is fundable. And that's really one of the things I want to stress today, is you are trying to figure out if you're both eligible and fundable. And fundable is really the key thing to consider. You want to, and this is important, because you want to spend your time applying for grants that are a good match for your business and also have a reasonable chance of getting funded. Applying for grants, administering grants, it takes time, and that's time that is taken away from, or resources taken away from, other things that are also important to your business. So you want to really be, if you're going to apply for grant funding, you definitely want to make sure that this is a good fit and that your chances of getting funded are pretty good. And so the thing is, and the way to think about this is, if you're a for-profit business and somebody gives you cash, you generally give them something in return, right? So if you get a loan, the bank or whoever gets interest and fees. If you get an investor to invest in your business, they either get a share of profit or dividends, or, they get an owner's, stake in the business. If you have sales revenue, right? Like you make money from what you're selling, you are giving that good and service that you're selling. And these three areas are the ways that most for-profit entities actually generally get cash coming into their business: loans, investments, sales revenue. So what about a grant, right? Like, that's not, like if somebody gives you a grant, they give you cash, what are you giving them in return? Everybody wants something for what they're giving. And I think that's important because most grants, when you get funding, they have some sort of a social or community purpose. There's a reason why there is a grant available. So what you need to understand when you're looking at a grant program is, what is that agency or organization? Why are they offering this grant to a for-profit business, to a farm or a food business? And what goal are they trying to achieve? Because what you want to do is you want to figure out how closely your project fits that funding entity's goal. Are you over here, if this is a grant program to really, to increase processing capacity in an entire region, and make it so that farms have more access to processors, are you over here where really, it's a very, very narrow group of farms that could take advantage of it, or there really is already a lot of capacity? Or are you over here where, that grant will drastically fit a need that is out there? So both cases, the applicant would be eligible. One is much more targeted to the funder's desire. And that's a really important thing to understand. Then you want to also think about your odds of being funded. What % of applications get funded in this program? Sometimes you won't know, especially with a new program, you won't really have a sense. Most USDA programs that have been around for a while, that information is available, like what % get funded. Because if it's a really low percentage and this is going to be a huge lift for you, taking time and resources away from something else that you can be doing, that might not be a good use of your time. But if it's a really high chance of getting funded, or it's a really valuable grant for you, then it might be more worth the risk. How much? And one way you can also figure is how much money is available and what is the largest grant size. And that's one way you can also get a sense of how many grants will get funded. So if there's only $100,000 available and it's $10,000 is the maximum grant, then it's probably going to fund about 10 grants. Right. And if it's $1 million and the maximum size is $100,000, once again, it's probably going to fund about 10 grants. It could be less, but but on the other hand, if it's $1 million and the maximum grant size is $1,000, there's a lot more grants available. You're more likely to get funded. And then you want to also look at, if the grant has been around a while, is my project comparable to projects that have been funded in the past? And you can go to the funder's website and look at who's gotten funded, what kind of projects are they. That's a good way. And also you can get project ideas there too. I mean, it's a good way to sort of say, okay, yeah, my project is, it seems like it's comparable to things that have been there. Otherwise you may look at it and go, wow, my project is not as complicated or not as interesting as these. Or you may say, wow, my project's way better than these. I really think I'm a strong candidate. And then the other thing you want to look at is, once again, I go to, just because you're eligible doesn't mean you're fundable. Does this grant program have priority groups for funding? And how much of an advantage in that evaluation process do they have? And then are there priority regions for funding, or categories or areas for funding? It could be, areas with low income. It could be areas that have high farmland value. It could be areas near a key industry. And how much of an advantage in the scoring do they have? You want to say, because I've looked at grants where you realize, yeah, I'm eligible, but the evaluation criteria is really, really heavily weighted towards census districts that have really high poverty rates, and I'm not in one. Or I might have to think about my project. Like with priority groups, I'll admit, with some grants where women-owned businesses are have an advantage as socially disadvantaged. I see that even when it's a couple applying, the woman tends to own 51% of the business. So it's a majority women-owned business. So are there ways of, are you able to take advantage of, sort of being within a protected category in that scoring? And then one thing is to talk to the funding agency. If you've got a project idea and you aren't sure whether it's a good fit or not, talk to the funding agency before the grant is announced. And this is especially true for things like value-added producer grants, some of the rural development grants, probably state grants. to get a sense if your project is fundable. A lot of times, especially for public programs, governmental programs, the agency staff won't be able to talk to you as soon as that program is announced because they can't give information. If they give information to one grower, it has to go to every grower. And so they'll have they'll have webinars that are recorded, they'll have that, but they won't like look over your specific project. But before that grant is announced, you can call up, your local USDA Rural Development Agency or the state agency and say, hey, I know that this program comes around every year. I'm thinking about this kind of a project. Does this seem like it's a good fit? And you can get some really good information that way often. Rural development in particular, I know is very responsive that way. And I think some of the state agencies, can be depending on the program, but that's a way to sort of go about this. This is just a quick example. So like when I talk about understanding the purpose, this is the Value Added Producer Grant, which is a grant program that helps growers process their goods, whatever they grow into a value-added product. Their purpose is to generate new products, create and expand marketing opportunities, and increase producer income. And all proposals have to demonstrate economic viability and sustainability to be competitive. So when you know this you have to be able to translate that then into your application. And then talking about reserve categories, value-added producer grants, 10% of the funds are reserved for beginning farmers, veterans, socially disadvantaged farmers or ranchers. That means that if you're in that category, 10% of the funding, you're only competing with that people in that category for the funds. An additional 10% were reserved for mid-tier value chains, which is a different. So if your project is in that, you're only competing against people at first who are in that thing. And then the rest of the funding is for all of the applicants. And so you can see you have a little bit of an advantage if you're in these categories because there's a pool of funding sort of set aside at first where you're, especially if you're a beginning farmer, you're not necessarily competing one-on-one directly as for the funding with somebody who may be more established, may like have a stronger proposal. And then also priority points in the scoring are awarded, once again, there's, that if you think that if there's 100 points available for funding, you can get up to 10 points for being in one of these categories, and they also have administrator points. They want to make sure that, grants go out, around the country. They don't want like all the grants. Let's just say all the grants, the best ones were all from, Colorado. Well, no agency wants to fund like 100% of the program in one state. And so they can add additional points to sort of help raise, or to meet other criteria. Like if they say they want funding to specifically go into distressed communities, so they can give additional points, which may bump up a project that, was not fun, in the high value area to being a much higher ranking project, so you want to see, like, do you fit into one of these? So you're likely to have an advantage, or do you not fit into one of these? So you really have to have an excellent proposal, in order to be competitive because you're already 20 points behind, a proposal that has all of these additional things too. And this is just sort of an example of like, so what you'll see is they'll for USDA programs, there will be a notice of funding. And that's where this notice of funding opportunity will tell you what the criteria are for the grant. They'll tell you, they'll talk about the scoring, so like qualifications, you get 0 to 20 points, and this is how we do the scoring. So you really want to read that stuff to get a sense of like, okay, how is it going to be scored, and how many points am I likely to get with the project that I have? Are there any questions so far?
I don't have any new questions. Guys, remember you can put questions in the chat throughout and Liz will answer them, but there's nothing currently.
Okay, good. So New York State Grown and Certified, this is a new grant. Well, it's sort of a reboot of a grant program that the state is about they're working with New York Farm Viability, and they're about to release it. So this is something that, some of you, if you're a New York State farmer, may be of interest, because it will fund infrastructure and equipment and things that you need, or research that you need for your farm. The RFP isn't out, so I don't have tons of detail about this. I only have what they have on the website right now, and a conversation I had with Farm Viability staff. But one of the key things is you have to be New York State grown and certified, or working towards certification and planning to be certified, in order to be eligible for this grant program. And remember when I talked about, like, what does the agency, like, why are they giving you this grant? This grant in particular is because New York State wants growers to be in this program and to meet the standards of this program. And grants like this are a way of helping to encourage growers to sort of get over that hump, become New York State grown and certified, join the program. And in return for that, you are now able to participate in grant programs like this. And they're working on this grant. They also, in order to be eligible, you have to have a benefit to the New York ag industry, and some significance to the region that you're serving. So, like, this would be a business that would be important to that industry and important to New York State ag. You have to make that case. They want to see new and innovative practices or approaches that meet industry needs and consumer demand. So, when they say this, like, so most farms, there's certain equipment that every farm needs to have in a certain industry, and if you're asking for that equipment, that's not new and innovative, that's sort of standard. But if you're asking for something that would, really, like, sort of move you to another level, maybe it isn't, it's something that could help with product development, processing, energy efficiency. That's really what they're looking for, is something that's sort of like moving the industry forward somehow. And these are some of the priorities that they have listed. But as I said, this is still new. And they, as I said, they're going to prioritize if you're grown and certified or working to be grown and certified. So this is something that, if you're looking for a grant that will fund infrastructure, this is a hoop that you need to jump through in advance, is starting that process. And you could start it now, since the RFP hasn't come out. And then you also, the other thing that's really important, and this is important in general, is you have to be able to clearly communicate about your business plan and your financials in the application. So if you don't have a business plan, if you don't have your financials in a way that can be understood by people and that can show how this infrastructure will make a difference, then you're already behind the 8 ball. And this is something that you should be thinking about soon. Another grant program is USDA Organic Certification Cost Share. This is a very different type of program. It provides organic producers and handlers with financial assistance to reduce the cost of certification, and it reimburses for a portion of your paid certification cost. It's a one-page application, proof of your certification, and an invoice of your expenses. It's very, very simple. So you can see there's ones that are much more complex, and then there are programs that are simpler. But to be able to take advantage of and be ready to apply for grants, there are 4 key steps. Before I go into those, I just want to make sure that people don't have a question again.
We actually have 2 questions.
Okay.
So the first question is, if you're in a reserved fund class and are beginning, veteran, and socially disadvantaged, funds in 3 separate reserve fund groups or 1 fund group?
It depends on the program. For value added producer grant this year, and also the program could slightly change every year, but like, I think this year, there were different pools. It was, you were in 1 group, but if you had, they also looked down, there was another place where there were like added points, and having more groups represented had an opportunity to give you more points. And I think that was more in the administrator point section. And I'm just sort of remembering this. So definitely highlighting all of the different groups that you participate in your proposal, if that's something that's important to the grant, is critical. But you won't necessarily get have them all stackable. The next question.
Next question is, how many years might you have been in business to qualify as a beginning farmer? The minimum, how many years? How few or
Yeah,
how
so
many?
I would say usually the USDA definition of beginning farmer is somebody who's owned and operated a farm for 10 years or less. So if you're applying for a USDA grant, that will generally be the definition of a beginning farmer. But, it could be that a state agency or a private grant would have a different definition. I would say, as far as how long should you have been in business, I see applications sometimes for people who are a beginning farmer and they haven't even had a growing season yet. You probably are eligible, but it's unlikely that you're going to be competitive, because you're going to be competing against people who sort of can demonstrate a track record of success, and you don't have that yet. And so I would say the most competitive beginning farmer proposals are generally people that have 2 to 3 years in and and therefore can demonstrate some growth in their business. It's clear that they're more likely to stay in business because they've already kind of gotten over the initial hump. And by then, after 2 to 3 years, you really know like what's missing on your farm. Whereas your first year, you're pretty much missing everything. And you're not, and often farms change within that period. So I would say, while you could certainly apply earlier, if you are a really early stage farm, unless the grant is really specifically for that, in general, you are going to have to be able to make a really strong case that you're bringing some really strong prior experience that's relevant to this venture that is likely to increase its likelihood of success. If you're brand new and you've never done it before, for most big grants that have a beginning farmer category, I'd say your odds of getting funded are pretty low.
Awesome. Somebody's asking if you can go back to the previous slide.
This one.
That one.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with this program, this is a program that you would go to your local FSA office, Farm Service Administration, and you apply. It's a USDA grant, and it's a reimbursable cost share program. And you can apply and get some reimbursement. There is a cap, and I can't remember off the top of my head what it is. It's I want to say 600, but that might not be right. So if your costs were more than that, it won't cover everything, but it is an amount, up to an amount that you can receive.
Awesome. Everybody's good then? That's
Okay.
all the questions we had.
So 4 steps that if you really think you want to write grants, in order to be ready, the 4 steps that I recommend based on what I've seen with proposals are: the first thing is develop a business plan. For grant writing, you don't have if you're just cash funding everything and you don't really, you can survive, you can have your business plan in your head. And a lot of people don't have a formal business plan and they're successful. So I'm not saying you can't be successful in life without a business plan. But as soon as you have to explain your business to other people and really articulate your goals and share those with other people, you do need a written business plan. And that plan should include, a description of the business so people can understand it, the key staff and their qualifications, because every single grant proposal is going to want to know who the key staff are and their qualifications. These are things. This business plan also often has the sections that go into a grant proposal. You should have 3 years of financial statements, or at least just to show, what you've been doing over the last 3 years. And organizations like SBDC can help you with that. Your accountant, if you have an accountant, can help you with that. And then I recommend, nobody says you have to do this, but this is my recommendation, is that you have, as you're developing your business plan, a 5-year plan for your business. And the reason why I say a 5-year plan is because you don't know what grants are going to be out there in the future. You don't know how programs are going to change. And so what you want to be, and often when an RFP comes out, you don't have a lot of time to like come up with stuff. And so you want to at least be thinking several years out. And also with grants, like you're not going to get the money instantly. Like, if you need a grant for something that you want to do in 2 weeks, you need to go get a loan because you're not going to get grant money that fast. And so this 5-year plan allows you to start thinking about projects, thinking about upgrades needed, thinking about your goals for the business, and articulating that so that when a funding opportunity comes along, you can see if it fits into this strategy that you have, and you already have gone through a lot of the work that you need to be able to pull that off the shelf and then apply for funding for it. And because it's part of a plan and a strategy, when you write, it'll make writing the grant a lot easier because you already you've already gone through a process of articulating why it's important, how it will fit into your business and stuff. You've done a lot of the work already. And then for key projects, having a sense of some of the budgets, right? Like if this is important, how much is it going to cost? What are the cost benefits of this? Thinking through those things that you would be doing as a business anyway, can also, can help you, that you might do for a loan or whatever, can also help you apply for a grant. So I think this is really important. And then you want to a lot of times people will hire a consultant to write a plan, or they'll write one and then it just sort of sits there. This is something that you want to look at annually, where is my business now? Where do we want to go in the future? So that you're always ready for things. And you'll also it should help your business, but it also will help you be ready to apply for funding.
We have a question about business plans. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, sure.
Are sample farm business plans available publicly or even funded business plans?
Yeah, so my favorite farm business plan template is University of Minnesota has something called Ag Plan. If you Google Minnesota Ag Plan, you should go right to their website. It's a University of Minnesota product, and it provides a template of a farm business plan. And for each of the sections, it also often provides examples of what kind of language would go in there. And then as an advertisement, I'm going to be offering an online business plan writing class this winter, starting in December, where we're going to use that resource, the Ag Plan, and go section by section, helping people write their plan. So that's, that for me is that resource, if you want to be a do-it-yourselfer, I think is a great resource. I hope that answered the question. You'll see you can see lots of examples of business plans. And I've looked at a lot of them, and a lot of them are helpful, but I think that Ag Plan is, if you really are serious about sitting down and writing one, I think that's probably the best tool for most people.
Awesome. And that is the only question we had.
Okay. So the other thing that a lot of people that I think that really separates people that are that get, when I look at applications that get funded and applications that don't get funded as a group, not there's always exceptions. Developing a network is really important. If you want to be successful in the grant writing space, you are going to need letters of support, and people are going to need to know about you. You're going to need letters of support and commitment. And the more people know you and they're aware of your business, the more honestly heartfelt letters they can write that really can talk about your importance. And they'll be more aware of what you're trying to do. So you really should be connecting with your business, with business advisors. And there's a lot of them out there that, Small Business Development Center, where you are today, Extension for Ag in your county or regional, nonprofits. There's a lot of ag serving nonprofits in the region. Then there are consultants, but having a team of business advisors, your county or your regional economic development office is another resource. These people can both give you technical assistance, but also in working with you when you need a letter of support, they know how hard you work, right? They know how committed you are because they see you they actually have seen you trying to do this. Customers and potential customers. So making sure that, trying to identify, if you've got some really strong customer relationships, you might need to, sort of at some point tap them for letters of support. Vendors or potential vendors, people that you will buy from, so that you can get prices really quickly for key equipment or specs or things like that, or letters that they will supply you. And then relevant agency or organizational leaders. And these are like, so it could be your small, your soil and water conservation district, if it's an environmental project, or FSA, farm service agency, if you've got a loan with them, and they can write a letter, depending on the grant, they can write a letter to say, you've been a good borrower, you're a successful business. Other relevant, commodity groups, Farm Bureau, if you're a member of your ag district, just being involved is really important, for people who are successful in grant writing. Making a list of potential sources of funding and the timing of those grant announcements. This is, starting to really notice, the pattern of these things, because there's really limited time to write a grant once they're announced. So being able to anticipate stuff is really important. So you want to get on email lists for USDA and relevant agencies. You want to use that advisor network about, talk to them about your key projects and ask what sources of funds might be relevant, and then keep notes, and then sort of, keep an eye out for those. For funds that are available annually, start working on the proposal even before the notice comes out. You might have to make some changes, but there's some stuff that you're always going to need for every grant proposal, and you can start putting that stuff together, start getting the prices for your, the equipment you want to buy, or the consultants you want to hire, and things like that. Because a lot of times these things will come out right in the middle of your growing season or your busy season, and then you're kind of SOL at that point because you don't have the time to do this. So make the time when you have the time. And then this is also really important, and this bites some people in the butt. You need to make sure you can access credit or have adequate cash for match or upfront costs, because almost every single grant for a for-profit entity, all of the ag grants that I can think of, many require a cash match. So you have to, and that can be either a commitment of a loan or cash that you can show you have in the bank. And increasingly, you're required to prove that you actually have the funds with either a bank statement or a letter from the bank. They won't trust you on that anymore. And then many grants are paid on a reimbursement basis. So if you can't afford the upfront costs, you won't be funded. So many lenders will provide a loan based on grant funds being authorized. And so being able to have a letter to that statement, but if you've got terrible credit, or you have no loan history and you don't have a relationship with a lender, and you're, and you're really cash constrained, you may actually end up not being able to get a grant. Ironically, because these are on a reimbursable basis, and if you're asking for funds to do a project or buy equipment, you have to be able to actually buy that equipment or make that change first, and then you get reimbursed. So that's just something to be aware of. So, all of this is basically grant funding is work. It's you're taking on another job. It's starting to become another thing that you think about. So you always need that balance, that effort of applying and managing a grant with the benefits that you're receiving from the grant. I just think that I can't really stress this enough, that there is no such thing as free money. In exchange for this, especially with public funds, there's accountability to the funder, there's accountability to the taxpayer, and that can be, they often want, or they're giving you the grant because they want something. And so you have to, that has to fit in with your business. So I think personally, the best grant funded projects for a for-profit entity are things that help fund either discrete pieces of equipment or infrastructure or supplies that are needed by that business as part of their 5-year plan, right? Like it should really be at a scale, at a, it should be part of your strategy. It should be something that you would buy yourself and put your own money into, assuming you had it, but now there's grant funding to help sort of offset that cost. I think those are ones where it's totally worth your time, because that time is now, you're putting in time instead of cash. Whereas if it's something that, you really don't need it, it doesn't fit into your business, it doesn't really like give you any value, or it's really uncertain, that's riskier depending on the amount of time you're putting in. Or, it helps fund activities on the farm that are in alignment with your overall business strategy and business plan. Like organic certification cost share, if your plan is to be certified, this reduces the cost. It's kind of a no-brainer. It could be that you need technical assistance in writing a succession plan, and so there could be a grant that would help with hiring a consultant to do that. And this is something you need. It's resources that you may not have readily available, but this grant would then allow you to offset the cost of a really good lawyer, offset the cost of a really good marketing firm, or things like that. So it fits in and it's offsetting that cost and it's in alignment. So I want to say, like, caveats, you always want to look at what your obligations are if you're funded. So people get so focused on the money and what the money will buy that they forget like the back end. So you want to make sure that the grant doesn't add too many costs onto the project for compliance, such that it stops being relevant to your business given your capacity. So, and these are just some things. These are not like a specific grant program, but it could require prevailing wage or, hiring a local workforce, because sometimes the goal of the grant is to like jumpstart the local economy, right? Like, and if that's the goal of the grant, they're going to want, to make sure that there's like some, sort of spillover benefits. It could require you to buy specific energy efficient equipment. There could be specific standards or certifications like, being grown and certified that you have to do. It could require documentation. And for some farms that would be easy. For some farms that would be a heavy lift. It could require audits or specific financial records, which once again, some businesses have great records and providing that kind of detail would be simple. For other farms, where they're less sophisticated financially, that could be that might require you to hire a bookkeeper now, so you've now, you have to hire somebody now because you're administering this grant that you ordinarily didn't have to hire before. It could make you better off in the long run, but you just should be aware that may change that calculation. And you want to make sure the project is something that makes business sense because you're going to be signing a contract to do the work. Oops, sorry about that. This is a very sensitive mouse. So it can be difficult to change. Once you've got this project funded, you've got a 3-year grant to put in to do something. You've made a commitment to do that. And it's difficult sometimes to change the project after it's funded. And and to pull out of things can be time consuming or challenging. And the time and resources that you put into this project are time and resources that you can't put somewhere else. And the longer the grant is, the more and the less about the future, you can find that you're now committed to something, but the markets have changed or your interests have changed. And yet, you're still like chugging away at something that no longer makes as much business sense. So it's just something to think about that, and be more aware of. And this goes back to why I say like really, 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 really beginning farmers, are higher risk because you often are at a stage where you don't really know what you want to do as much. Whereas somebody who's been in business for 10 years, and this is part of like a longer term strategy, they can anticipate 3 years out a little bit more easily. So, and this just is a really quick chart. This is my opinion, really, is that, these are some examples of grant and cost share programs for farms. There's a value-added producer grant from USDA Rural Development. It's an annual program. It's a really reliable program, and it's to develop and sell value-added products, but it's a very complex grant to write and to administer. So it's it's a really valuable grant, but it's not, and it's definitely, it's a commitment. Environmental Quality Incentives Program is an NRCS, more like a cost share program. It's more of a rolling basis. That's something like you would work in partnership with NRCS. A lot of people use this to get high tunnels, but it can also fund other conservation practices. And it's complex because there's still rules around it, but you also you also can get more assistance from the agency in doing it. So it's more of a yellow. Organic cost share is a USDA. It's also rolling, and as they have funds, and that's a green because it's basically some documentation that you got certified and you get reimbursed, it's pretty sure. Rural Energy Assistance Program is another good program USDA Rural Development has. It comes out 3 times a year right now. And that funds alternative energy and energy efficiency loans and grants. I've worked with maple producers, for example, who've used this program to fund reverse osmosis systems because they add, energy as an energy efficiency upgrade. This New York State Consolidated Funding Program, this comes out every year. And you apply through New York State Economic Development Regions. It can fund infrastructure. But it changes every year, and it's based on a regional planned and funding availability. So it's pretty complicated. This is one you have to be more sort of wired in and have a big project, I think, often to use. Although some years there's like a little thing. It's good to be aware of, but it changes a lot. And then there's this New York State Grown and Certified that's coming out in the end of 2023, beginning 2024. And that can fund capital, equipment, and other practices. As I said, the RFP is not out yet, but it's probably going to be more like a value-added producer grant as far as paperwork and complexity. But I don't know for sure. I mean, it could be more like a yellow. And then if you're a meat producer, there's the Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program, Rural Development, and that helps expand meat processing capacity. So if you're looking to, start a slaughterhouse or process meat, this is a source of funding for that. And it's fairly straightforward because there's less variation in meat and poultry processing, but it's still, because there's a lot of standards around meat and poultry processing, it's not as easy as just like a one form. Are there any questions right now?
I don't have any new questions currently.
Okay, good. So, all right, so now I'm going to move into tips. So we're getting sort of in the bring it on home section of the proposal. Read the notice of funding and other information to try to determine how your application will be evaluated. Definitely, you really want to understand the program. And then, or ask people about it too. You can talk to the agency, you can talk to Small Business Development Center, World Economic Development people, like Extension can try to get you some information. Follow the directions and provide all information needed. This one should be kind of a no-brainer, but it's really important. If you work with a grant writer, and a lot of people work with grant writers to put proposals in, make sure you work really closely with them. Don't just sort of turn the grant over to the grant writer. For a couple of reasons. One is grant writers, they want to have a successful grant, but you want to make sure that what's in that proposal is really representative of your business and really the project that you want, because you're on the hook for this project if it gets funded. And it's a lot of times, you really do need to be involved in the process. This really does need to be your farm's project. The grant writer is great, but don't just have a grant writer write you a grant for something that, all of a sudden they've overpromised, or it's not really a good fit, or, I just see proposals sometimes that I'm concerned that it's really, it's really not. They've tried to make the farm look really good, and they've tried to make it a winning proposal, but it's not really representative of what that farm's capacity is and what their real interest and needs are. If you write the proposal yourself, have someone else look over your proposal to edit for clarity and make sure you don't miss anything important. One key thing, and this is more of a tip, is to use that intro or summary to sort of give that who, what, where, why, and how, and tell a compelling story, because reviewers will get a stack of proposals to review, and having that intro be really clear about what the farm is, what they're asking for, why they're asking for it, and what it'll do, makes it a lot easier to read the rest of the proposal. So that's a really, 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 it seems like an afterthought, but that is probably one of the most important sections of your proposal. Don't forget, and I see people do this, to include relevant experience about you or your partners on the project, to have, because the only way a reviewer is going to know anything is based on the information that they have in front of them. So you want to show that you're competent to do the work. A great idea that's proposed by an inexperienced farm with no technical assistance providers might not get funded. So if you have experience that can prior experience or credentials or educational background or a consultant that will be working with you that you can get a letter from, you want to include that, because that's really, really, really important. Don't skip detail on parts of the proposals where you're specifically answering questions that are part of the scoring, even if you feel you've already answered the question elsewhere. Reviewers have a lot of proposals, and the more they have to do, the more likely they are to miss details. So the places that the most important part of the proposal, in some ways, is that the place that is where they're asking the questions that are part of the scoring. That's why you want to understand how it's scored, so you can make sure that this section of the proposal is really, really strong. And this is an area I've seen people like skip questions on I think they're tired by that point on this section, or they just sort of say C section whatever. And I'll tell you, after reading like 30 proposals, when somebody does that, you like go C section blah blah blah, and rather than just answering the question, you're tired as a reviewer. And so you want to make the job for the reviewers as straightforward as possible. And so this is really, really important. Make sure that what you're asking for is reasonable given the size and scale of your business. Just because you can ask for $250,000 doesn't mean you should ask for $250,000. I've seen proposals where the business has, net income, or even actually just revenue of like $30,000 a year over the last 5 years, and now they're asking for a $250,000 grant, to buy equipment and stuff, and it's kind of like, you're a pretty small business. That's a huge influx of grant money into a business that has never generated that much revenue, or even close to that much revenue. So it should be, what you're asking for should be really, really, really proportionate to your need and your scale. So don't overpromise. Don't say you're going to do more and ask for a little bit, because and then don't get greedy, because most reviewers are experienced and they can tell when a project isn't feasible or when it's not cost effective. They want to see a clear, well thought out project from a competent person that has a high likelihood of success and a reasonable budget. That's really what a reviewer is looking for. So you really want to think about like projects and ideas that are appropriate to your scale or your likely scale, and that fit. They don't want to see you shove in like every last thing you can ask for, but it doesn't really like demonstrate clearly how it's going to like, have reasonable growth. So at this point, I'll turn it over to questions.